You always hear about it. Boomers wrecked the economy. Millennials killed entire industries. Gen Z can't put the phone down. Every generation gets a headline. Except one. The one that got home from school at 8 years old, let themselves in with a key hanging around their neck, and just waited. No adult asking how their day went. No supervision. No conversation. You made yourself a snack, turned on the TV, and figured it out on your own. Psychologists call this the generation raised without applause. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980. They don't make much noise. They don't need constant recognition. They don't turn every effort into a headline. And that's not random. It's psychological. Picture this. It's 1978. You're 8 years old. The school bus drops you off. You walk to the front door alone. You pull out a key hanging around your neck, unlock the door, and the house is empty. Nobody's there. You make yourself something to eat, turn on the TV, and wait. That wasn't unusual. It was just a Tuesday. Millions of kids grew up exactly like this. And when a kid learns too early that nobody's coming to save them, something shifts. They learn independence, sure, but they also learn something heavier. If something goes wrong, it's on you. You can't text someone asking what to do. You can't look it up. You can't negotiate the consequences. You decide, and then you live with it. Psychologists call this a high contingency environment. Action and consequence directly connected, with no emotional buffer in between. It trains the brain to think 2-3 steps ahead, all the time. Not because you're pessimistic, because if you don't think ahead, you get it wrong alone. That's why so many people from this generation seem to predict problems before they happen. It's not pessimism. It's a brain that's been calculating risk since age 8. But here's where it gets more interesting. They grew up hearing speeches about stability, commitment, loyalty, while watching divorce rates skyrocket, companies laying off employees after decades of service, institutions failing in ways that actually mattered. The message underneath all of it was clear. Not everything that promises security is actually secure. That doesn't create bitterness. It creates something more specific. Prudent distrust. Psychologists call it defensive pessimism. Hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Because once you've watched the worst happen more than once, you stop calling it bad luck. From the outside, that can look like cynicism. It isn't. It's pattern recognition. And that pattern builds a kind of emotional armor. Here's a key piece of it. Gen X generally doesn't dramatize things. They don't turn every emotion into a public announcement. They don't need the world to applaud their effort, because they grew up somewhere recognition simply wasn't constant. Nobody handed out a medal for surviving alone in an empty house. Nobody validated you for solving a problem without help. You just did it, and that was that. That builds adults who don't depend on outside applause. It can also build adults who genuinely don't know how to receive that applause when it finally shows up. There's another layer: privacy. When this generation was growing up, life didn't get permanently recorded. If you did something embarrassing, a handful of people knew, not millions. So constant visibility never felt natural to them. It feels risky. Being seen means being exposed. And if you learned early that exposure can cost you, you'd rather watch from the sidelines. That's why so many people from Gen X scroll through social media, but rarely post. It's not inability, it's emotional memory. They also developed a very specific kind of humor, ironic, a little detached. Almost anything can become a joke. Nothing feels too serious. Why? Because they grew up in a world that genuinely felt unstable. nuclear drills at school, political chaos on the news, adults saying everything's fine while everything around them suggested otherwise. When the environment feels uncertain, distance protects you. If you don't get too attached, it hurts less when it falls apart. But here's the paradox. Despite all that instability, they build an almost invisible work ethic. They don't give speeches about productivity. They don't post about discipline. They just show up and do the work. Many started working young, delivering newspapers, working retail, real responsibility long before adulthood. It wasn't to pad a resume. It was actual training in how to be useful. They learned something important early. You can't control the system, but you can control your own competence. You can't stop a crisis from happening, but you can make yourself useful within it. That builds a quiet obsession with becoming indispensable, not for praise, for safety. And here's the contrast that makes this generation so specific. Deeply independent, but if someone genuinely needs help, they show up. No announcement, no turning it into content. Loyalty isn't a performance for them. It's just practice. Because when you grew up leaning on friends in the absence of adults, friendship stops being casual. It becomes structure. Authority gets an interesting twist, too. Gen X doesn't automatically respect a title. They respect actual competence. If you know what you're doing, they'll follow you. If you don't, they quietly create distance. They grew up watching people in power make serious mistakes, so they learned early that obeying without question can have consequences. That builds critical adults, but also a bit defensive. Financially, they lived through crisis after crisis. Nothing ever felt permanent. That reinforces one core belief: nothing is fully secure. That's why many diversify their income, not because it's trendy, but because of memory, lived memory. But every strength comes with a cost. Research shows this generation tends to seek less emotional support during stress, not because they don't need it, because asking for help can feel like weakness. The early programming was simple: figure it out yourself. That makes them incredibly effective in a crisis, but it can also make it harder to be vulnerable, to let someone else carry part of the weight, to admit they can't do it alone. And here's the part that matters most. Gen X wasn't raised with applause. They were raised with responsibility. No constant validation, no permanent exposure, no heroic narrative attached to it. That built adults who don't need outside recognition to act. But it may also have built adults who rarely ask for the recognition they actually deserve. They're the bridge generation, between analog and digital, between the stability that was promised and the instability they actually lived through. Bridges don't get celebrated. They carry weight, connect two sides, let everything pass over them, and keep standing without making a sound. The question isn't whether that made them strong. The question is, how much of that armor is still necessary today? Because growing up without applause can teach you that you don't need it. It can also teach you not to let yourself receive it, even when it's real. If you're part of this generation, maybe you just recognized yourself in this. If you're not, maybe you understood someone close to you a little better. But underneath the generational label, there's something universal here. When you learn too early that you're on your own, you become someone who rarely asks for help. That can be strength. It can also be weight. The difference is whether you're choosing that independence today or just carrying it forward out of habit.